Well, hello there, sir and sir. Andrew, Michael, hello. Welcome to
Hello.
Association Transformation, the podcast.
Looking very
How are you?
festive. You're looking very
I am.
festive
Well,
today,
it's
Lisa.
the season. It's number one, it's freezing. Number two, it's the season. So yes, I bring out my best. I try to give, visual enjoyment to our YouTube watchers.
Yeah.
If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, check us out on YouTube every once in a while because we are going through the trouble of video these days
Yeah.
for
That's true.
you, just for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's nice to
we
see that you've dressed up as Santa Claus for us. It's lovely. It's excellent.
and
Thank you.
you're in your Grinch costume, the same old black sweater you wear every time. That's great. I appreciate your consistency and commitment to your character.
And I would just add that I'm a little bit skeptical about this YouTube thing because I've been told that I have a face for radio, whatever that Oh.
You know what? Andrew's been told that many a time, and it didn't stop him. It didn't stop Andrew.
Don't listen to them, Michael. They're talking nonsense. They're just jealous. They're not up. They're just jealous. They're not on YouTube themselves.
Oh goodness, Michael Randel, thank you for joining us, founder and director of Randel Consulting Associates, and I would say the resistance guru, change management resistance. I'm excited to dive into this. I actually think I was joking with Andrew. I think this is probably going to have something to do with our joint autobiography, resistance and its contribution to transformation. I
Yeah.
think is really
Hmm.
this the story of our. It might be our album. Maybe this is what we'll channel. We'll title our first album. But it's also a weird word. Resistance is a weird word, and so I'm glad we have you here to chat about this. Because you've written some articles, you've committed to resistance and the pros and cons of this. But as it relates to the association space, the nonprofit sector of which the three of us are committed to, what does resistance mean? I mean, I think Star Wars, I think there's a lot of things that are triggered for me with the word resistance.
When you said Star Wars, the image that popped in my mind was one of those scenes where they're doing battle within the battleship, and the hallway is crowded with good and bad, with the whatever they are,
Right? The
lightsabers going
green
back and forth.
lasers and the red lasers and the blue, and you don't really know who's in.
Exactly. And sometimes it feels like that in organizations, doesn't it? You kind of you're the noble person, you've announced a really exciting change that you think people are going to love, and then they don't, right? What is with those people? Why don't they get it? Don't
Oh
they
my
see this
God.
is good for them?
You've just
But,
summed up. You just summed up the last 10 years of my career. Like,
maybe, and again, I spend a lot of time on the front end of change, and I wonder if the answer is in how you described that situation, in that you announced a change,
Mm-hmm.
versus the other ways of bringing about transformation. What are you still seeing these instances of the announcement from the mountaintop of the executive or the chief, the CEO or the board chair kind of issuing these edicts? Are people still doing things that way?
Oh, they certainly are.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. One of my clients had this experience last year. So it's a global multinational financial institution. Um, I was working with the HR function, which decided that HR was so 90s, right? We need to be current. We need to be about people and culture,
mhm,
right? So they had
okay.
done some surveys among the HR staff, several hundred people in the global organization, saying, what should our new name be? What's contemporary, cutting edge HR all about? They got
Yeah.
different bits of feedback. Those HR folk didn't hear anything further until at 10:30 one morning, the vice president sends a message to them saying, hey, I'm so excited that in half an hour, our CEO is going to be announcing our new brand. Right. So they got a 30-minute heads up that this change is coming.
Mhm.
And we will be getting back to you with resources and talking points for you to bring to your internal clients.
Hmm.
And yes, I mean, people do this. Again, well-intentioned, they think they're doing it right, but they just make misstep sometimes that get started on the wrong foot and just makes people cynical, right?
So we're not even talking about the validity of the idea or the validity of the change itself. This is really all the people part before,
Absolutely.
during, and after, or lack thereof.
Yeah. I mean, I think very often, if we were to kind of survey and talk to folk in this particular scenario that I described, maybe even majority of them would say, yes, we're long overdue for a name change and a fresh brand and a really different way of working. But I don't like the way they went about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm resisting, right? Yes, I'll follow along, but I'm begrudging. I'm not wholeheartedly participating and contributing my best to this initiative.
Well, as someone who does a lot of strategic planning with organizations, it's a struggle. It almost sets you up for some kind of paralysis because you're never going to get everyone to feel the way that you want them to feel. Mm-hmm. How do we begin? How do we not just talk ourselves out of any and every change because of the intangible human nature of this that is so hard to control? Maybe control is not even the right word. To influence.
I think you just use a really good word there, influence, right? So I think an important part of leadership is letting go of the notion that you can control everything, right? And there's a kind of a balancing point you need to find, and it's going to vary issue by issue. So I sometimes will make the statement, organizations are not democracies. Mm-hmm. Okay? And I can see, Elisa, you had a certain facial response to that. Now,
well, I grew up in that environment. You suck it up, you do your job. This is work. I don't have to thank you. I pay you. And I actually did have a client last quarter, and we had to say, put your big boy pants, put your big girl pants on. Like, this isn't friends. We're not. This is business.
Sure. So I think sort of one of two opposite mistakes get made. The one is the leader who thinks, it's not a democracy. I rule. It's, I guess, an autocracy, which is a word, we're hearing around far too often these days. But, it's like, I rule, they need to do what I've told them. The other side of it is, well, every voice counts, right? We've got to consult everybody before we can come to our final conclusion, our final decision. We've got to make sure that whatever our decision is, it's going to be liked by everybody. And I think those are equally disabling, unhelpful approaches. So somewhere in the middle, as always, lies the path, which is about, there are some things that we will need to take hard decisions as leaders without consultation or with limited consultation. And there'll be some things where we actually need to consult and engage more than we might like to, because we'll actually get a better informed decision, better understanding of the stakeholder dynamics to then chart the path forward. And that's about judgment. And unfortunately, I think relatively few management courses, leadership courses really cultivate judgment, because it's not something you do between 2:00 and 3:00 on Thursday afternoon, as a part of your overall program over 3 days of Management 101.
Sorry, I was listening and I was reflecting as you were talking. Sorry, I was reflecting.
You looked confused for a second.
No, I'm not. It's not. I'm not confused at all. I'm not confused at all. It's interesting because it's just reflecting on quite a lot of my own leadership experience. And when you said, that we're not a democracy, I've actually used that line myself.
How did that go?
Oh, it never goes down well. It never goes down
if you're
well.
Having to say that, if you're having to say that, you've already lost the battle.
Yeah, exactly. But as we're talking, I'm thinking, in an association context, I mean, if we're talking about the direction that we are leading an association, a membership organization, those words, consult everybody, just strike so much fear into my heart, because it's like, we obviously have to strike the balance and say, well, we have been delegated our authority as leaders of an organization, a membership organization. We've been delegated our authority to make decisions on behalf of the organization. And I wonder if sometimes resistance to change, resistance to decision making is driven as much by a lack of is driven by a lack of confidence in those who are making decisions, but also sort of exacerbated by the individuals themselves who are lacking in their confidence. And we see it all the time. I mean, we see it not all the time, but we see it a lot. We see it a lot where we talk about, well, this is the membership, this is the members' organization, so we have to do what the members say. But practically speaking, if you've got 30,000 members, we can't do that. We can't do that. So how do we counter resistance when, practically speaking, we have a board of 10, 12, 15 people who arguably should be, making those day-to-day decisions. I'm curious as to, how do we engage with the volume and counter their potential resistance to change?
Well, I think, associations have a particular challenge, because I want to kind of just name 3 core stakeholder groups, which are not in themselves homogenous, right? But you've got the members you just referred to. Yeah. You've got your governance structure. And, I long for boards of 15 people. Coming to the US from South Africa, encountering boards of 60, 80, 100 people, which is like, how does that work? Right.
Yeah. And I think that should be part of our Halloween episode. That'll be Halloween nightmare, association nightmares, the 60 to 90 person board. That'll be our next Halloween horrors.
Right. Because actually it's not a board. It's just like allowing people to have their name saying they're on the board and all of those sorts of things. Yeah. But it's a stakeholder. And then the third one, of course, is staff. There's many more, but those are kind of 3 key constituencies that are unlikely to be fully aligned around everything that you want to do. Right. And as leadership, as professional staff, I think, again, there's this balance between to what extent are we supporting and serving members according to the needs that they've expressed, and to what extent are we bringing leadership to the field, that we're using our vantage point to point out trends, to name issues that need attention. So, I would sort of think about many association leaders have had to grapple with the whole thing about DEI, right? Mm-hmm. Many of their members might not be ready to really engage that wholeheartedly, but from that leadership perspective, you might say, this is something that's really, really important for our field. The diversity and equity in our boards, the diversity and equity in our staff structure, all of those things, you can't simply follow direction, right? And so in the heart of all of that is, you can be pretty sure that any decision you make will, and I'll use a technical word here, piss somebody off, right? So you can't satisfy all of your constituencies, all of your stakeholders. So there is going to be some form of resistance.
Yeah.
I think the point I want to make is that resistance itself is not homogeneous, right? And I think people often talk about, there's resistance, there's pushback. Yeah. But actually, it takes different forms. And part of the mistake people make is thinking it is homogeneous, and therefore the thing to do is to push back even harder,
right?
Rather than becoming appreciative. They're pushing back. Isn't that interesting? I wonder why.
Right.
What's the message in why they're pushing back? Yeah. Did I miss something in how we thought about what needed to change?
Yeah.
Did we actually need to consult more than we did? Because then we could have gotten buy-in by acknowledging the value and the perspective of a range of different perspectives. Yeah. So we really need to take a little bit of time to appreciate resistance and understand the different forms in which it shows up.
I mean, you use the term gift resistance as a gift. And I think you're right to remind us that resistance really only comes from people who care, from people who are paying attention, and people who care enough to have an opinion. You identify it in your recent article about the surprising gift of resistance, that there are really three types: that I don't understand it, I don't like it, and then maybe I don't like the messenger, or I don't like the leader or the owner of it.
That's right.
How in those three examples, how does it feel? How is it a gift? How do you use it as a positive, and what do you take from it?
Yeah. So, Elisa, you named something that's really important, which is resistance is like other things going on in organizational life. It's about energy and the direction in which it's being pointed, right? Where is it moving? And so when we think of the kind of classical sense of resistance, it's kind of energy that's coming at me, pushing back when I'm trying to push something forward, rather than ideally the energy that's coming alongside of me and helping me push this thing forward, right? So there's a sort of a equal but opposite force that can often lead to stalemate.
Yeah.
So again, the thing is, let's welcome it and let's be curious about why it's there. And so, yeah, there's many different ways of talking about resistance, of categorizing resistance. In my kind of professional training in Gestalt approaches to change, there's a particular framework that looks at 6 or 7 or 8 forms of resistance. And I understand the kind of different forms, but I can't always remember the words that go with it. So I was delighted when I found this 3 levels of resistance framework that was developed by a consultant here in the Washington, D.C. area called Rick Maurer. And he's really specialized working around resistance. And he talks about it, these 3 levels. So level 1 resistance is, I don't get it, right? It's like, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand why we're making a change now. And that's the way you want to be able to come back in to speak with more information, to understand people's questions and answer them and respond to them, to help them get why we're making the change or why this is changing but not that, right? So that's sort of an information and understanding and a communication response. Relatively easy to deal with, right? So long as you don't make the mistake of presuming that it's personal resistance to you, because then you're going to like overreact.
Yeah.
The second level of resistance is a little bit like the HR example I spoke earlier. I don't like it. Yeah? I might feel there's a need for change. I might have my own ideas about what should change, but now the leadership has just announced a particular change, and it's not the one that I would have done, right? Or what they're wanting to change is great, but it's not everything that needs to change. So I'm agreeing on the need for change, but I'm in challenge around precisely what's being changed, right? And so my pushback and feedback is intended to improve the change, if you will, right? And so I think what we do as leaders with that is we then respond in dialogue. It's like, well, where did this fall short of the mark? What ideas do you have to make sure that this change can be sustained? All of which can improve our sort of implementation of the change. So we've got, I don't get it, I don't like it. And our third one is perhaps more challenging, which is, I don't like you.
This one's my favorite.
All right. So this is often coming when trust has been broken, or the leader hasn't developed sufficient credibility and authority in announcing and making a particular change. And you can't resolve that through communication. You can't resolve that through consultation and creating a working group that people can be part of to improve implementation. It's about relationships. And so you have to approach that from the perspective of understanding what it's about. I've not earned your trust, or I did things in the past that broke credibility. What can we be doing to use this change as a way to build and restore trust? Yeah. So I think using this kind of very nice little shorthand of these 3 kinds of change helps us not think that this is just a homogeneous pushback against me, but rather it's information from the system telling me that something's not landing well, And there's an opportunity to respond and to actually enhance how we're going about the change by working with it appropriately and respectfully.
Yeah. What I like about this, putting my chief staff executive hat on, I like having these tools, having this framework to prepare for resistance in advance, so that when the board sees resistance or hears about it, I, as the staff executive, can say, we expected this. This is not unheard of. We have a very diverse audience, and here's how here's how we're reacting to it and how we're going to assess it. But with that same staff hat on, I wonder if our efforts and your expertise shouldn't be more focused on the avoidance of resistance.
Mm-hmm.
But what I hear you saying is maybe that's impossible.
I don't think you can ever eliminate resistance. And if you were to have no resistance at all, then I get really curious. I mean, it makes me think about it's a toxic workplace where there's no psychological safety.
Yeah.
Or there's a massive amount of groupthink going on. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So yes, we know from experience that many change initiatives are going to not meet their full objectives. Yeah. There are common mistakes that people make, missteps. And so I think there is a lot we can do in the very beginning process. How we prepare for change is how I talk about it. Right.
Yeah.
That we can think through and anticipate and sort of do a kind of a risk management piece around what do we need to adjust to attend to the possibility of this happening.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you highlight, and you're right, if the absence of resistance is suspicious in itself and maybe a different kind of red flag. What I see a lot of organizations do, both clients and friends and anecdotes, is whatever that discussion around change is, they outsource it to a member task force or a member focus group, whatever it is. They almost kind of punt to let the membership or a subset of the leadership of members do the thinking, so that whatever that final product is, I struggle with this. I get that we want input, we want diversity of thought and member-led discussions, but it seems like someone's missing the opportunity to be the leader. Someone's missing the opportunity to socialize a challenge and present a solution. And they just hand it off to this body of members to fight about it. And then whatever comes out of that, they say, well, this was the members' suggestion. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're seeing? Or is that, I don't know, it's happened a lot lately that I see these member task forces chewing on things that the board probably should be doing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Before we answer that, I'm still unclear, however, how do I know what type of resistance I'm facing? I mean, unless someone, and Elisa's very good at telling me exactly what resistance I'm facing, but if I'm working in an environment where maybe there isn't good psychological safety, or maybe it's not a communicative safe space, how do I know if it's short of me saying, look, is this because you don't like me or because you disagree with me? How can I tell what's driving the resistance?
Well, the first tip I would have, Andrew, would be to read the note wrapped around the brick that just came through your window. That might give some clues.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
Well, hopefully folk won't kind of resort to things like that. So, what you're saying makes me think about, like, the first mistake might be, I'm sensing resistance towards me. I therefore need to diagnose it and respond to it. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's like something I've got to manage by myself. Whereas if we broaden that, like us as the leadership team, what are we hearing and noticing? Do we have a shared view about what might be going on? Do we have thoughtful and engaged staff that we can consult to hear what they're seeing and they're hearing from their peers that can inform us and guide us?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is the greatest piece of leadership courage the engagement of those demonstrating resistance, a phone call. I mean, a good old fashioned phone call to say, I want to make sure you support this, or I want to understand your pushback. Do those phone calls happen anymore? I feel like they don't.
It's interesting. You were talking earlier on, well, either here or in one of your podcasts that I've been listening to, about leaders not having confidence in themselves. It may have been in one of your episodes. I think what happens sometimes is that leaders don't have confidence to engage in consultation. They've got their idea of what needs to happen, and they're worried about opening it up for participation, that the other ideas will come in, are going to leave them feeling unsettled and unsure about how to move forward. So, part of it is about not becoming arrogant, but having confidence in both your idea itself, your assessment of the need for change. Maybe that's a better place, right? I see the need for change. I'm open as to what we might do about it. I want to get input and ideas. I want to hear, not to be guided necessarily, but I want to get different perspectives about what people think we need to be doing about this change. Do we even agree that this is an issue that needs to be changed?
Should all that happen on the front end, though? I mean, isn't that part of how we avoid the gift of resistance? Is all of those elements should come on the front end before a change is decided upon.
But then I think then that if it doesn't, or if when resistance happens, you struggle with it, I think that's then an issue around resilience. Courageous leadership requires you to be resilient, and if you're afraid to consult because you don't like what you perceive as confrontation, or you don't like what you perceive as challenge, because you simply cannot absorb what you're perceiving as negative, then that points to a major deficiency in your resilience as a leader, and I think it points to something much larger.
I think you're either not confident in your own leadership, or you're not confident in the recommendation that's being made.
Well, yeah.
And likely both of those are true because you didn't engage in the process correctly. You didn't invest in the collaborative and communicative elements that initiating change should include. We can go, there's so many angles to this. I mean, the sociology, the psychology of change, the psychology of resistance. I think we're talking a lot about the insecurities of leadership. There are so many levels to this. And Andrew, I hope we can include Michael's article from earlier this year on the surprising gift of resistance. I'm still somewhat struggling as to whether I want to avoid resistance in total or be prepared for it and figure out how to address it in a positive, proactive way. Maybe the answer is both.
Well, see, I don't have. It's interesting you say that, because actually, I don't have a problem. Contrary to what some people may feel in the past, I don't have a problem with resistance in so much as it gives you an opportunity to dissect, take it apart. Right. I think engaging with resistance, as long as you're then willing to respond, that's a really healthy environment. If someone says, nah, not too sure about this actually, and then you take it apart, and then you get to be creative again. But I guess it's,
you say take it apart. Resistance is going to expose your change and all of its weaknesses, all of its short-sightedness, all of the lack of inclusive discussion that were used to bring it about.
Well, so, not necessarily. I mean, that's an extreme example.
Well, let me suggest a really real example, right? Return to office. How much consultation typically happens when leaders hand down the thing of, you must be back in the office 3 days a week or 5 days a week? And there is resistance to it, right? And I have a colleague that we talk a lot and work together around this kind of being a hybrid workforce, managing this return to the office dynamic. I think leaders don't want to expose the real motives for these policies to debate.
Correct.
Because they're actually not staff friendly.
Yeah. It's
right.
Like the 4-day week. It's like the 4-day week concept is exactly the same, isn't it? The 4-day week.
Right.
So I mean, I spoke with one of my CEO clients, and her wording was, I like coming to the office every day, and it's kind of lonely when I'm here by myself. So, I don't see why they can't come back into the office.
Right. So that's, to me, is motivation. That is self-serving motivation, or that is a lack of data, or a lack of willingness to share the data. If this is profit-driven, if this is mission-driven, if this is staff-driven, I mean, there's going to be perceptions from each and every angle around a change. And
and again, one can legitimately say, look, we're paying this amount in rent every month. The lease runs for another 3 years. We can't get out of it. Right? We don't kind of want to just throw that money away. So we're wanting to experiment. How do we repurpose this physical space, right? As opposed to simply, we all come back into the office and we sit in our offices with closed doors or in our cubicles, and we spend all the day on Zoom calls with people outside, or even with each other sometime, right? Because we haven't reimagined what does work look like, and how do we take advantage of being together. That's really about doing real collaboration, and not just saying we're coming to the office in order to collaborate.
Yeah. And this can be applied to so many examples. And thank you for that, Michael. That's a great one. Yeah. I'm sure there's many more conversations to be had about this with many more examples. But if nothing else, for our staff executive leaders, for our board leaders who listen, think about this in advance, be prepared for this, understand how you are going to use it as an opportunity, and just go into this with eyes wide open, change management in general. And what you explained in that last example reminds me of how important the new acceptance of vulnerability seems to be. And I hope leaders can use that to their advantage as well. But maybe most importantly, Michael, I want to welcome you to the Association Transformation family. Longtime listener, first-time guest. So thank you so much for joining us. We will put a link to your article in the show notes. Andrew, prepare for much more and consistent resistance from me. I commit that to you.
As long as you accept my vulnerability, which you seem to ignore a lot on this pod.
Well, yeah. So you know what I'm getting you for Christmas? I'm getting you resistance for Christmas.
And Andrew, a wise man, once said that resistance is an opportunity to demonstrate resilience, I believe.
Oh, he did. Someone also said resistance is futile.
I love it. Well, thank you both. Thank you for this important conversation. Let's have it again. And until that time, put your members and your mission first.